Joining us now is someone who has some insight into Trump's speech tonight and his mindset at this moment is former campaign manager Corey Lewandowski. Thanks for being here. So, Corey, have you spoken to former President Trump since he's rewritten his speech? We're told it'll run about an hour. Can you give us a preview? Anything you know about it?
Well, Elizabeth, as the president has said very publicly, the speech that he was going to deliver here tonight has changed dramatically since the attempted assassination on him. And look, I think what the country is going to hear from Donald Trump tonight, as they've heard from leaders of this country since our inception, is that unity matters. You know, when we've had our darkest times in this country, whether it was the bombing of Pearl Harbor or the 9/11 attacks, leaders bring people together. And after an event like this assassination attempt on him, Donald Trump is not just talking to those Republicans here in this arena or those Republicans who aren't here. It's not just the independents he's talking to. He's going to talk to every American that says, listen, politics is important, but going home at night is the most important thing. And there is a stark contrast between the realities of what Donald Trump's policies are going to be for the next 4 years and those of a potential another Biden administration, and that will be articulated tonight.
Yeah, how does he reach out, Corey, to those people, those independents you just mentioned? You said he doesn't just want to talk to the party faithful who are there at the convention center with him, but to people sitting at home who might still be on the fence, even fellow Republicans, especially some moderate Democrats.
Well, Elizabeth, look, we saw that Ambassador Haley released her delegates here so that they could actually vote for Donald Trump. That was very magnanimous of her. We know that she's had a following in this election. But what we've also seen, though, is from those rivals, they're now contemporaries. They're now friends. They're all very much unified behind Donald Trump, whether it was Nikki Haley or Doug Burgum or Tim Scott or anybody else who ran against Donald Trump this year. They've now supported him, are supporting him. And what we know is this, Elizabeth, that the electorate is made up of 53% of women voters who are making economic decisions for their families, and they have felt the crushing policies of the Biden administration for the last 3 years. Those are the voters, ultimately, who are going to make up the decision of who is the next president of the United States. When we look at those female voters in Bucks County, those moderate suburban women who want to make sure their families are safe, they have economic security, they have homeland security, that's who this message is going to be tailored to tonight.
How has the assassination attempt changed Trump? We keep hearing from Trump himself and from people close to him that he's changed. You've spent time with him. What do you think?
Well, I think you see a much more emotional Donald Trump, and I don't mean that as a negative. When he walked into this arena on Monday night to God Bless America, I think many people saw his eyes well up. When he heard from his granddaughter last night, Kai Trump, talk about who the grandpa is that she loves and the human side of this, I think he was very emotional on that. You know, Donald Trump has always projected strength and endurance and toughness, but when a bullet goes past your face, takes off a piece of your ear, and you were literally millimeters away from having your life ended by an assassination attempt, your life changes. And I think it gives him additional introspective and more faith. And he has said this already. He is only here by the grace of God. I believe God has a job for Donald Trump, and that job is to be the president of the United States again.
You know, you talked just a moment ago that 53% of the electorate are women, and women have felt very strongly about their having say over their own bodies. I know that he has definitely softened his position. He thinks this should be a state issue and not, there are many in this country, including his own running mate, J.D. Vance, who've been far tougher. J.D. Vance in the past has said that abortion should be illegal and without any exceptions for rape or incest. His quote was, "Two wrongs don't make a right." Is there concern that the pick of J.D. Vance on this ticket might turn women off?
I don't think so. Listen, what Donald Trump has said is that the states are the laboratories of democracy. Let people in their respective states vote on it. I think there's 17 states across this country that are going to vote on the issue of abortion and how those states want to deal with that matter. You know, we saw in Ohio last year, what is now a very conservative state, make sure that people still have access to that if they want to. It's not Donald Trump's decision of when a woman should or could have an abortion, if that's what she chooses to do. And the Supreme Court returned that back to the states. And more importantly than that, what Donald Trump has said is, let the people decide. That's how this democracy, that's how this constitutional republic works.
Thanks so much for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.